In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd was walking across a hillside in southeastern Turkey when his foot caught on something. He kicked the dirt, a carved stone surface appeared. He kept digging, more stone. He called archaeologists. What they found over the next 30 years rewrote the history of human civilization. Göbekli Tepe, 12,000 years old. That's 7,000 years before Stonehenge, 6,000 years before the Great Pyramid, 4,000 years before writing was invented. And yet what's buried in that hillside is undeniably, unmistakably a temple. 20 circular enclosures, each arranged around a pair of massive T-shaped limestone pillars up to 5.5 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons. The pillars are carved with animals, foxes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, lions, boars. Some of them have arms. Some wear belts. The carving is confident and deliberate. This isn't primitive scratching. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing put these images here. The people who built this had no writing, no pottery, no agriculture. They didn't live in cities or have a state or a king. By every definition we were using in 1994, they were hunter-gatherers, people who hadn't advanced to civilization yet. But you don't build this by accident, and you don't build it alone. The German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led excavations at Göbekli Tepe for years until his death estimated that constructing one of these enclosures would have required hundreds of workers, coordinated over weeks or months, fed, housed, organized. That means someone was keeping track of labor, managing food supply, directing effort toward a goal. That's what civilizations do. And here's the part that really disrupts the standard history textbook. We were taught that the sequence goes hunter-gatherers, then agriculture, then settlements, then religion, then monumental architecture. First you get farming, then surplus, then cities, then temples. Göbekli Tepe suggests the sequence might be backwards. What if religion, or rather the need for a communal gathering place, a shared symbolic world, came first? What if the organizational demands of building something like this are what pushed people toward agriculture, not the other way around? Feeding hundreds of workers at a construction site requires stockpiling food. Stockpiling food means tracking resources. Tracking resources means staying in one place. Staying in one place means planting. Schmidt believed that Göbekli Tepe was a pilgrimage site, that people traveled from across a wide region to come here for rituals, feasts, communal work, and that the logistics of supporting that pilgrimage site may have catalyzed the agricultural revolution in the area. The Karakadag Mountains, the genetic birthplace of domesticated wheat based on DNA analysis, are just kilometers from Göbekli Tepe. That proximity is not an accident. The enclosures were deliberately buried. At some point around ABC, the people who used Göbekli Tepe filled it in, not neglected, not abandoned, intentionally covered with rubble and soil. Every enclosure, the whole complex, that preservation is the only reason we have it today, and we still have no idea why they buried it. Only about 5% of the site has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar shows at least 16 more enclosures underground. There are more carved stones waiting down there than we've seen in 3 decades of digging. We don't know these people's name. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what they called this place or what god or gods they believed in. But 12,000 years ago, they looked at this hilltop and decided it was worth everything. They quarried 10-ton stones without metal tools. They fed hundreds of workers for months. They carved with precision and intention. They were trying to say something permanent. We just don't know what. The deeper you go into this subject, the more you realize how much of the ancient world we're still reconstructing from fragments. For every site that has been excavated, dozens more remain untouched. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery have transformed what archaeologists can identify without digging. And what they keep finding is that the ancient world was larger, more connected, and more sophisticated than the version that appears in most textbooks. The conventional history of civilization traces a clean line from Mesopotamia through Egypt, through Greece, through Rome, to the modern West. That story is real, but it's incomplete. It leaves out entire civilizations that developed in parallel, built impressive things, and then were erased from memory so thoroughly that we had to rediscover them in the 19th and 20th centuries. The pattern repeats across every civilization in this series. A society builds something extraordinary. It sustains itself for centuries, sometimes millennia. Then a combination of environmental pressure, political instability, and external shock pushes it past the point of recovery. The population disperses. The monumental architecture is abandoned to the weather. The writing system is forgotten. The gods stop being worshipped. And then, hundreds or thousands of years later, a plow hits a stone, or a satellite detects a buried structure, or a researcher notices that a myth mentions a place that no one can find, and the long work of recovery begins. What we know about this civilization today is the product of that recovery work. The archaeologists who spent their careers in the field, often under difficult conditions in countries that weren't always stable. The linguists who stared at undeciphered scripts until patterns emerged. The paleoclimatologists who drilled lake sediment cores to reconstruct rainfall patterns 4,000 years ago. None of this was inevitable. The clay tablets at Ugarit survived because they happened to be in a kiln when the city burned. The linear B tablets at Pylos survived because the fire that destroyed the palace was hot enough to fire the clay. 100 other archive rooms burned and left nothing. What we have is what chance preserved. And what we're still missing, the literature, the theology, the personal letters, the poetry, the arguments and the love stories and the complaints about bad harvests, is almost certainly larger than what survived. The ancient world was full of people who thought, worried, loved, argued, and built things they hoped would last. Most of what they made is gone. What we have is a fraction of a fraction. But that fraction is enough to know that the standard story, progress marching steadily forward from primitive origins, is wrong. Complexity rises and falls. Sophisticated societies emerge and collapse. Knowledge is discovered and then lost and then rediscovered. The lesson isn't that civilization is fragile, though it is. The lesson is that human ingenuity shows up in every era, under every condition, in every corner of the world, where people are trying to solve problems and make things that last. The mounds at Cahokia, the pillars at Gobekli Tepe, the sewers at Mohenjo-Daro, the peace treaty at Hattusa, the alphabet that Phoenician merchants scratched onto clay, and eventually, through a chain of borrowing that crossed a dozen cultures over 3,000 years, became the letters you're reading right now. That chain didn't have to hold. It nearly didn't, several times. But it did. And somewhere under the fields and deserts and jungles of the ancient world, the next discovery is waiting. The next tablet in the wrong kiln. The next footstep that catches on the edge of something buried. The work is nowhere near done.